Okay, but let's talk about this book, because this is a book that, of course, is something that I think is for our time. This is not a book that you would have seen written 150 years ago, right? It's not necessary then, but it seems to be necessary now. You're only human. So, what is the reason behind you writing this book that you said, by the way, it was 20 years or over 20 years in the making?
Yeah.
So tell us a story about how this book came to be and why.
Yeah, and I actually mean that. Sometimes when authors say that, you're like, no, I'm not, this is actually, these ideas I've been wrestling with at least 20 years. Yeah, there's some personal reasons, there's some theological reasons. Maybe I'll start with a couple personal. One, and I've told this story before, but listeners tend to be able to relate to it. So I find when I put my head on the pillow at night that there's a surprising amount of time that a wave of guilt and shame comes rushing over me. And I'm a Reformed theologian, if that means anything to your audience. And
that means you get double guilt and shame.
Well, no, I mean, if you really want to do the personal, I grew up Roman Catholic.
Oh, triple!
Converted in a pretty fundamentalist Baptist setting, and then have been Presbyterian for a long time. So, I did a PhD in the Puritans, so I am expert at guilt and shame. But that's another podcast,
another episode.
But anyways, as a Reformed theologian, if I take sin seriously, right? Yeah. And so if when I have that sense of shame or guilt, eventually, I think, okay, what's going on here? And if, as I evaluate my day, kind of do an examine in the old tradition, if I start to think about, oh, wow, I was really cruel to that person, I was dismissive, self-righteous, you name the sin, as things come to mind, I need to repent of those things and just rest in the glory and grace of God. But actually what surprised me is as I would start looking at that and doing some examination, I realized the shame so often was actually not about those things. It was this: why didn't you get more done today, Kelly? You failure. Why didn't you do more? And so the question is, should I be feeling guilt and shame about that? Because there's always just so much more I need to do, so many more people I should see, books I should read, preparations for me. I mean, there's just, depending on what you do for a living, time with your children, I should spend more time, be more present. I should pray more. I should read more, my Bible more, memorize more. There's just so much more. And so it's very hard when that shame comes to go, yeah, I should do better. I should do more. And so as a theologian, I'm very interested in the question, what's the problem here? And my short response to that is basically, in the world and in the church, I think the way we've dealt with that fundamental problem is through time management. And so even in church, when someone feels that, we're like, well, let's get you more organized, right? Let's get you more efficient. So that's part of it. On the other personal side, my wife and I got married in 1993. In 2008, she got a rare form of cancer that normally appears in women in their 80s, and she was in her 30s at the time. And we had 2 young children. And through God's grace, eventually through surgeries and stuff, she was declared cancer-free. But starting in 2010, she's had chronic pain basically every day since that day to this day. And God provided resources I hadn't planned on ever researching and writing on suffering, but with her encouragement and a grant from the Templeton Foundation, I ended up writing a book called Embodied Hope, which is about suffering. But what's interesting is, though I've been wrestling with this idea of what I call finitude, I can explain that more. It wasn't until I finished working on pain and suffering that I felt able and equipped to now more clearly think through the goodness of being a creature. So in some ways, it's a reverse order. Now I've had a lot of readers tell me, oh, I've read them both, and now I want to read them in reverse order. Because actually you could read You're Only Human and then Embodied Hope later. But so those are the personal reasons. And then there's some theological ones, but I've been talking for a long time. So,
but that's the job that you have. You're the guest on the show. You're supposed to talk.
All right. As long as you're still with me. So, I mean, the other side is on the theological side, I'm deeply concerned, coming from evangelical circles, I just don't believe we have a very robust doctrine of creation, and that is often that is often surprised people. They're like, no, we talk about creation all the time. We have for decades. And I'm like, yeah, but the test is when I say the word creation, what do you think? And they think, well, we talk about how old the earth is and exactly how God made it. We talk about origins questions. And while I think there's some relevance to those questions for the doctrine of creation, that is not the doctrine of creation. That's certainly not the first and foremost questions, I think. They're legitimate questions, and at some point you need to talk about them. But I think for the last 150, 180 years, we've been so dominated by that kind of thing, it's actually really hurt the church. So things like, why do our bodies matter? And some of these kind of things really have been neglected. So in different ways, I've been trying to push into the doctrine of creation myself. And so those are some of the things. And I'm on a roll.